The text came in at 7:43 on a Sunday morning, just as I was pulling the muffins out of the oven. I had made blueberry, the kind with lemon zest, because my granddaughter Poppy had asked for them the last time I saw her. That was 6 weeks ago. I'd been counting. The message was from my daughter. 3 sentences. I read them standing in my kitchen in Guelph, wearing the apron my late husband had given me for our 35th anniversary, holding a muffin tin with oven mitts that were older than my son-in-law. "Mum, we've been talking and we need some space for a while. Please don't come by unannounced anymore. We'll reach out when we're ready." I set the tin down on the stovetop. I read the message again. Then I took off my oven mitts and sat down at the kitchen table and looked out at the backyard, where the maple tree my husband had planted the year Adrian was born had just started to turn orange at the tips. I want to tell you something about that moment, because I think it matters. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there and the house was very quiet, and I thought, how long has this been coming? That's the part nobody tells you about. Not the message itself, the question underneath it. Adrian was 34 when she married Theo. I liked him well enough at the start. He was polished in the way that can look like confidence until you've known someone long enough to see the edges. He worked in commercial real estate in Hamilton, wore slim-cut suits, shook my hand firmly the first time we met. My husband, this was 3 years before the cancer, leaned over to me at dinner that night and said quietly, "He's the kind of man who keeps score." I told him he was being unfair. I think about that a lot now. The first years were fine. Adrian and I talked twice a week, sometimes more. When Poppy was born in 2019, I drove up to Hamilton from Guelph every Tuesday to help. That was the arrangement, my day. I would take the 401 up after breakfast, spend the day, be home before supper. I did this for nearly 3 years without missing a single Tuesday unless I was sick. And even then, once I went with a head cold because Adrian had a meeting she couldn't move, and there was no one else. I never asked to be paid for any of it. I never expected to be. That's not why I'm telling you this. I'm telling you because by the time that text arrived on a Sunday morning in October, I had also done the following. I had paid off the last $40,000 of Adrian's student loans when she was 28 and going through a rough patch between jobs. I had given them the down payment on their house in Hamilton, $85,000, money from the sale of my own parents' property in Prince Edward Island that I had been keeping in a GIC for emergencies. My husband and I had agreed before he died that when the time came we would help Adrian get established. So I did. I gave her the money 18 months after the funeral, when I was still barely sleeping and eating cereal for dinner half the week, because it felt like something he and I had promised together and I wanted to keep it. I never put any of it in writing. The money was a gift. That's what I called it. And every Tuesday for nearly 3 years, I drove to Hamilton and looked after Poppy while her parents worked. And I never once thought of it as a transaction, because it wasn't. She is my granddaughter. I read her Goodnight Moon until I had it memorized. I know which brand of crackers she'll eat and which ones she refuses. I know that she's afraid of the drain in the bathtub and that she likes her hair done in 2 braids, not 1. I know the little sound she makes when she's falling asleep. That's what 6 weeks without seeing her felt like a sound I couldn't stop listening for. I didn't respond to the text right away. I put my phone down and went for a walk along the river trail, the one behind the neighborhood where I've lived for 26 years. The leaves were starting to come down. It was the kind of Canadian October morning that makes you feel like the whole world is being honest with you. All that bare gold light and the cold coming in off the water. I thought about calling Adrian. I thought about driving up to Hamilton and ringing the doorbell. I thought about what I would say. What I did instead when I got home was pour myself a tea and call my older sister in Victoria. She listened to me for a long time without saying anything. When I finished, she said, Have you talked to anyone about the money situation? I said I didn't think there was a money situation. She said, that's the thing, Gloria. There might be, and you don't know. My sister's name is not important. What matters is that she had been watching this from a distance for longer than I had. The way people who love you sometimes see things more clearly because they're not standing in the middle of it. She was the one who said gently but plainly, you've given that household more than $120,000, and now they're asking you to disappear. You need to understand what that means legally and practically before you respond to anything. I told her she was being dramatic. She said she hoped she was. I waited 4 days before I responded to Adrian's text. In those 4 days, she did not call me. She sent one follow-up message on Monday evening that said, hope you're doing okay, Mom, with a small heart at the end. And I looked at that heart for a long time and felt something I couldn't quite name. Not anger, something more like grief with a question inside it. On Thursday, I texted back and asked if we could talk on the phone. She said she'd check with Theo and get back to me. She got back to me 2 days later. We spoke on a Sunday afternoon. The call lasted 11 minutes. I know because I looked at my phone afterward. Theo was on the call too. He did most of the talking. He used the word boundaries 4 times and the phrase healthy space twice, and at one point said that they felt my involvement had become enmeshed in a way that wasn't serving their family unit. He said this in the same tone he would use to describe a zoning issue. I said, can I please speak to my daughter? Adrian said, Mom, Theo and I are on the same page about this. I said, I understand that. I'd still like to hear it from you. There was a pause. Then she said, we just need some time. It's not forever, but we need you to respect that we're making our own decisions about our family. I said, and Poppy? Another pause. Theo said, Poppy is adjusting to some new routines. We think consistency is important right now. I did not say what I was thinking. I said, okay, I hear you. I need some time to think about this. And I ended the call. Then I sat in my kitchen for a very long time. The muffins I had made the week before were still on the counter in a container. I had forgotten to throw them out. They were hard as stones by then. Here is what I wish I had understood sooner. There is a version of love that teaches people that you will absorb anything, not because you're weak, but because you love them so completely that you've made yourself into a surface they can push against without consequence. I had done that for years with Adrian, not because she was a bad daughter. She wasn't, not always. But because after her father died, I think I made myself smaller in ways I didn't notice. I stopped taking up space. I stopped asking for things. I said whatever you need so many times that I think she stopped being able to imagine that I needed anything at all. Theo didn't cause that. He just recognized it and moved into the space it created. That's hard to write, but it's true. I have a friend, a woman I've known since our kids were in school together, who had been through something similar with her son and his wife a few years earlier. She was the one who told me over coffee at her kitchen table in late October about the family lawyer she had used to sort through her own situation. Not to fight anyone, just to understand where she stood. I made the appointment for the following week. The lawyer's name was a plain, direct woman in her 50s. Corner office near downtown Guelph, 3 photographs of her own grandchildren on her desk. I liked her immediately. I told her everything in order. The student loans, the down payment, the Tuesday childcare, the text message, the phone call, the 11 minutes. She listened without writing anything down until I finished. Then she opened her notepad. When you gave the down payment, she said, was there a gift letter? I said no. Any written agreement at all? No. And the home is in both their names? Yes. She wrote something down. She said, the money you gave is legally considered a gift unless there's documentation indicating otherwise. You have no claim to it. She said it plainly, not unkindly. Then she said, what I would encourage you to think about is what you want to protect going forward, and whether there are any assets, a property, your own estate, where you want to ensure clarity about intentions. We talked for an hour. When I left, I sat in my car in the parking lot and called my sister. I told her the lawyer had confirmed what she suspected. Then I cried for about 10 minutes. Not about the money, about finally having to admit that I had built something without a foundation and then been surprised when it didn't hold. I wrote Adrian a letter, a real one, on paper, which I put in an envelope and mailed with a stamp like it was 1987. I'm not embarrassed about that. Some things need to be said slowly, in a way that can't be screenshotted and shown to a husband on the couch. I didn't mention the money. I didn't threaten anything. I told her that I loved her, that I had loved her since before she was born, that nothing that happened between us would change that. I told her that I was her mother, and that I was also a person, and that I had feelings and needs and a life. I was still trying to figure out how to live without her father in it. I told her that I had driven to Hamilton every Tuesday for 3 years because I wanted to, because Poppy is my heart, and that I had given everything I'd given because I loved her and wanted her to have a good life. And I told her that I was stepping back, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I needed to stop showing people how to treat me by accepting whatever they offered. I said, I will always be here if you want to find your way back. But I'm not going to wait on the front step anymore. I mailed it on a Tuesday, which was not an accident. I changed my will that November, not out of spite. I want to be clear about that. Out of clarity, my estate lawyer, a different person, walked me through my options and I made decisions that reflected my actual relationships and my actual situation. I put in place a trust for Poppy directly, separate from anything going through her parents. I updated the beneficiaries on my RRSPs. I made sure the house in Guelph was protected. None of this felt good. None of it felt like winning something. It felt like doing paperwork at the end of a long illness. Theo called me in December. This surprised me. Adrian had not reached out since I sent the letter, though I knew from my sister that she had received it because Adrian had called our sister twice in November. Both times my sister had listened and not taken sides. Theo called on a Wednesday evening. I didn't recognize the number because he usually texted from Adrian's phone. I almost didn't pick up. He said, Gloria, I think we got off on the wrong foot and I'd like to clear the air. I said, okay. He said they'd been under a lot of pressure. He said Adrian missed me. He said Poppy had been asking for Grandma and that it was hard to explain. He said he thought maybe they'd made some decisions in a reactive way and that he respected everything I'd done for their family. I let him talk. He talked for a while. When he finished, I said, I appreciate you calling. I do, and I've missed Adrian and I miss Poppy every day. But I need you to understand that I'm not going to come back to the same arrangement. I can't keep giving everything and being asked to disappear whenever it becomes inconvenient. That's not a relationship. That's a service. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, That's fair. I don't know if he meant it. It doesn't entirely matter. What mattered is that I had said it out loud to the person it needed to be said to, and I hadn't apologized for it, and my voice hadn't shaken. Adrienne called me the following Sunday. We talked for 40 minutes. She cried. I cried. She said things I had needed to hear for years, and she said them imperfectly and haltingly, and in the way that people do when they're telling the truth instead of the version they've rehearsed. She said she knew she had let things go sideways. She said she didn't know how to be a daughter and a wife at the same time and that she had been choosing the easier one. She said she was sorry. I told her I accepted that. I told her it was going to take time. I went to Hamilton on a Saturday in January, the first time I'd been there in 4 months. Poppy answered the door. She looked at me for a half a second and then grabbed my hand and pulled me inside and said, Grandma, come see what I made, and dragged me to the kitchen table where she had been making something with beads. I sat down across from her and I looked at her little face. absolutely concentrated on those beads. And I thought about all the Tuesdays I had driven up that highway, all the mornings, all the crackers and the bath drains and the 2 braids instead of 1. And I thought none of that was wasted. Not a single Tuesday. Even the ones that led here. The relationship with Adrian is different now, quieter, more careful. We're both watching where we put our feet. I think that's all right. Some things have to be rebuilt from the ground up, and that means you can't rush the foundation. I still don't drive up every Tuesday. I go when I'm asked and when it feels right, and I have learned, slowly and imperfectly, how to say that doesn't work for me without feeling like I'm failing someone. My husband would have had a lot to say about all of this. He would have been angry on my behalf, and then he would have cracked a dry joke and made me laugh at something I wasn't supposed to find funny. I miss him for 1,000 reasons, and this is one of them. What I know now, that I didn't let myself know before, is this. Love isn't proved by how much you absorb. You can love someone completely and still ask to be treated like you matter. Those 2 things aren't in conflict. It took me 63 years and a very blunt letter on paper to understand that. The maple tree in my backyard is bare now. It'll come back in the spring. It always does. I keep coming back to the muffins. Blueberry with lemon zest, sitting in a container on my counter going hard as stone while I tried to figure out how my own daughter had become someone I needed to make an appointment to speak to. There's a kind of cause and effect in life that doesn't announce itself. It builds quietly, the way ice does under a road, invisible until something heavy passes over it and everything cracks at once. I had spent years making myself easy to overlook, not because I was weak, but because I loved Adrian so much that I confused absorbing her choices with supporting her. Every time I drove up to Hamilton without being asked. Every time I said yes when I was tired. Every time I let a small unkindness pass without naming it. I was teaching her something. I just didn't realize what the lesson was. What I've come to understand, slowly and not always gracefully, is that doing the right thing over and over doesn't protect you from being treated badly, but it does leave you with something no one can take away, the knowledge that you acted with integrity. I paid those loans. I gave that down payment. I drove every Tuesday for 3 years. I did all of it cleanly, without strings, because it was the right thing to do for someone I loved. The fact that it wasn't appreciated doesn't change what it was. That's something I had to sit with for a long time before I stopped feeling like a fool for it. The harder lesson was about my own judgment. When Theo said the word enmeshed on that phone call, my first instinct was to apologize. That instinct, that automatic flinch toward making myself smaller so someone else could be comfortable, that was the thing I had to look at honestly. Wisdom isn't just knowing what's happening around you. It's knowing what's happening inside you and having the courage to tell yourself the truth about it. I had been telling myself a comfortable story for years. Revising it was not pleasant work, but I did it. I made the appointments. I asked the hard questions. I wrote the letter. I sat in the parking lot and cried, and then drove home and made dinner. That's the part of the story that doesn't look dramatic from the outside. Just a woman in her 60s doing unglamorous things because they needed to be done. No one gives you credit for that kind of steadiness. You just have to decide it matters anyway. The January morning when Poppy grabbed my hand at the door and pulled me inside to see her beads, that was not a reward for good behavior. Life doesn't work that cleanly. It was just what happened next. But I was able to receive it fully because I hadn't compromised myself to get there. I hadn't begged or collapsed or pretended the previous 4 months hadn't happened. I had held my ground, and so when I sat down across from that little girl, I was actually present, not relieved, not performing forgiveness, just there. I'm still learning how to take up the right amount of space. Some days I do it better than others. But I know now that the people who truly love you don't need you to disappear to feel comfortable. And the ones who do, well, that tells you something too. The maple tree always comes back, but it comes back because it survived the winter, not because it pretended the cold wasn't real.